What is institutional economics as a subfield of economics? And to answer this question, I first need to explain briefly what is an institution, what is economics, and then what is the paradigm of institutional economics as a field. In other words, what questions does it look at? What are the tools it uses to look at institutions? That's what I'm covering in this video. And first of all, what is an institution? It's going to be the rules, roles, and enforcement mechanisms that structure human interaction and human relationships. So examples of institutions include markets, it includes marriage, the corporate sector, the legal system, journalism, higher education, regulatory bodies. And it's worth separating institutions from organizations. Like, organizations are specific groups of people, such as a specific corporation or a specific school. And organizations are many institutions in and of themselves, but oftentimes they're nested under a umbrella category of institution that sort of sets up the roles and rules such that it's understood across institutions, such as, a corporation generally has a CEO and a management structure and a board of directors, and that's something that's somewhat similar across different corporations. So institutions are the software that runs the economy, essentially. Now, what is economics? Well, there are a couple of different ways of looking at the field of economics, where the field started out by looking at the allocation of scarce resources. And that, of course, included capital, like machines. It included labor as a scarce resource, money, natural resources like water and fresh air and all that stuff. So that was sort of the original I think of it as what are we looking at through our lens? What is the thing we're studying? But in order to study that, economists have developed these really powerful tool sets that include things like cost-benefit analysis and optimization problems for optimizing profit, optimizing utility, optimizing social welfare. And they include like vocabulary terms and concepts like opportunity cost and marginal analysis. So this tool set is actually really, really useful for looking at a lot of different questions, some of which some people may not necessarily relate as closely to scarce resources. Although usually you can kind of figure out, okay, if you're studying cost-benefit, something is scarce, even if it's a more conceptual thing. So in any case, that's what economics is. And neoclassical economics actually takes institutions as exogenous. It just sort of assumes, yeah, we have this legal system, it's out there, it's fixed, it's not changing. We have this system of marriage and higher education. Those are just there, and we're not studying how these things change and evolve. But then, of course, economists came along and recognized, actually, these are deeply tied in with how we allocate scarce resources, with how firms interact with legal regulatory bodies and all of that. So we realized, actually, our tool set that we've developed for studying scarce resources can be used to look at institutions and how they evolve and how they change and how we might structure them to improve the cost-benefit ratio of public policy and all of that. So that started the field of institutional economics. Now, institutional economics as a field is actually a pretty diverse field of thinkers. And some of the different branches of institutional economics are actually going to conflict with each other in their assumptions or in their approaches, but they each bring sort of a different lens and a different tool set for thinking about the questions around institutions, the economic questions, that is. So what are the questions that institutional economists look at? Well, they look at questions relating to coordination and efficiency within institutions, collective action, repeated interaction between players, reputation building, property rights, the principal-agent problem, the evolutionary nature of any of these institutions, really. So all of those are sort of features that and questions that institutional economists can look at. Because if you think about it, a lot of these institutions are designed to facilitate repeated interactions among people in markets or in a marriage or in higher education. And if you want repeated interactions to go smoothly, you're going to have game theory situations like repeated prisoner's dilemmas or repeated games of chicken that are sort of set up among the relational dynamic inside each of these institutions. Institutional economics is going to also look at how do you structure the legal system, what changes could you make to the rules of the game to make the relationships within that institution work out more smoothly. And if there are hierarchical roles, you're going to have some form of principal-agent problem where the manager is trying to get the worker to do something in the institution and the incentives are not perfectly aligned. So in a lot of ways, the structure of the institution is going to try to align incentives among people at the top of the hierarchy and the bottom of the hierarchy to try to achieve the purposes of that institution. But that principal-agent problem can get messed up, and the economics of that is just super interesting if you think about what makes institutions function well or not. And then of course economists think a lot about why do institutions change? Why do they evolve naturally? Because if you're developing some sort of legal structure or public policy, it's going to act on these institutions, and it's not going to act on them perfectly because they, of course, have their own internal institutions, which are basically the institutions written on people's hearts and minds and brains. And if there's not good alignment between the external institutions, like the formal structure and the formal rules, and the internal institutions, like what people understand, what they value, if there's not good alignment between those, then the system will not work well. So studying institutional change, depreciation of institutions, things like that, that's all in the wheelhouse of institutional economics. And Douglas North and Eleanor Ostrom are two economists who are prominent thinkers historically in this space. There's many others, of course.